Right now, you're standing before a financial secret the elites don't want you to know. If you're holding cash, buying stocks, bonds, especially in the US, or even just doing nothing with your money, then after 2025, your assets will only have two outcomes. 1. Gradually losing value, eroding your hard-earned money bit by bit. 2. Suddenly becoming worthless, turning into mere paper overnight. Why is this happening? Because Trump and Elon Musk, under the guise of government reform, are actually plotting to abolish the Federal Reserve, the Fed. Don't be fooled by their seemingly disagreeable relationship with Fed Chairman Powell. In reality, they are trying to wipe clean all of America's debts. What does this mean for your wallet?
Let's rewind. In the past, the US told the whole world, just give me your gold, keep it in my national reserves, and I'll issue you US dollars. Then you can simply use dollars for transactions. Very convenient. When you want your gold back, just bring the dollars to exchange. This system was called the gold standard. The US dollar was backed by the value of gold. But suddenly, the US abolished the gold standard. Since then, you can still use US dollars for transactions, but if you bring dollars to exchange for gold, they won't exchange it anymore. What does this mean? The US used printed money to exchange for the gold of the entire world. And after that, the whole world could only hoard US dollars for transactions instead of hoarding gold.
At that point, the US Federal Reserve began continuously lowering interest rates and printing money, causing the dollars held by the entire world to lose value rapidly. The US then told you, holding US dollars will make them lose value, so lend me those dollars and I'll pay you interest. This forced the whole world to lend US dollars to the US. Currently, the US owes the world a huge amount, to the point where they cannot even pay the interest. That's when Elon Musk, the power behind Trump's rise to power, proposed an unprecedented idea: shut down the Federal Reserve. If today, the institution responsible for issuing US dollars is shut down, will the US dollar become a pile of worthless paper? And if the US dollar becomes worthless, will the US still need to repay its enormous dollar-denominated debt to the entire world? This is like saying, even if I owe you a lot of money, if the currency is worthless now, paying you back won't mean much.
Many people will find this unbelievable. Can the US really wipe out the value of the dollar? Musk even said that in the future, the US will no longer need to use US dollars, but will use Bitcoin. If they come to power, this plan might be implemented, and all the money the world has lent to the US will not be recoverable. So is this true? In fact, the US is gradually eliminating the role of the US dollar. This year alone, 6 US states have recognized gold as a form of currency. What does this mean? In the US, the power of a state can sometimes be greater than the federal government. That means states may not comply with federal government decisions. Currently, these 6 states declare that in addition to using US dollars for transactions, people can also use gold. Globally, countries usually use their own currencies for transactions. You go to Japan, you use yen. To South Korea, you use won. No one carries gold to buy a bowl of ramen in Japan. However, paper money is just a piece of paper printed at a very low production cost, while gold must be mined and processed at a very high cost. Therefore, for convenience and to reduce costs, Countries often choose to issue their own paper money for transactions instead of using gold.
But if the trend of using gold as currency returns, the global financial system will undergo major changes. If today you say, I can use Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies for payment, maybe I just need to scan a QR code with my phone and the payment is done. This is called technological advancement, and I would think you're doing everything to make things convenient for me. But if you now make me go back to ancient times, carrying gold in my hand to buy things in these 6 states, what does that mean? In a previous video, I talked about an alternative to the US dollar. It's gold. When the US dollar appreciates, gold usually depreciates, and vice versa. If people start using gold instead of dollars for transactions, will the Federal Reserve, Fed, the agency responsible for issuing dollars, lose its power? That's why even Warren Buffett dares not recommend buying gold, fearing that this would strike at the very root of the dollar system. But now, the fact that these states are starting to link the dollar with gold and encourage people to use gold instead of dollars, isn't that a sign that even they feel the dollar is in trouble? Are they preparing for people to convert some of their dollars into gold before things get worse?
Recently, it seems Trump has changed his stance, announcing he won't force the Fed chairman to resign. What does this mean? I'd say this will probably be the biggest financial fraud in history. And the shocking part is, it's legal. Over the past 4 years, Trump's hidden plans have been obstructed by Biden. But after 2025, when Trump returns, these upgraded money transfer spells will resurface. The hard-earned money that countless people have struggled for half their lives could be wiped out in a short time. What does that mean? If you don't want to become a pawn or a victim of this game, or even if you want to use it to climb beyond your current social class, you can follow my channel. In future videos, I'll provide more information. If you're worried that you won't be able to implement what you hear, you can like this video. That will save it to your playlist so you can re-watch it anytime. First, what's Trump's plan? The US currently doesn't have enough money, so they need to transfer money from all over the world back to their country. His plan is an upgraded version of a money transfer spell. If successful, after 2025, the assets of the middle and lower classes worldwide will be transferred to the US. Simply put, the US borrowed your money, but they can't pay it back, so they'll let you, the lender, bear the debt instead. What does this mean? Why was the whole world willing to lend money to the US before? It's simple. For example, if today I lend the US $1 million, they'll use that money to invest in their economy. Each year, from taxes and profits, they might earn $200,000. Out of that, they'll pay me $50,000 in interest. That way, both the US and I benefit, and I won't hesitate to continue lending to the US. But now, you'll see that the US isn't like before. After borrowing $1 million from me, they only use $300,000 for business investments. The other $700,000 is wasted pointlessly. Officially, this money is for subsidies to U.S. citizens, but in reality, it has flowed into the pockets of a small, powerful group. This has caused U.S. tax revenue to plummet, while spending has continuously increased. As a result, the U.S. no longer has enough money to pay me $50,000 in annual interest. They're forced to borrow new money to pay old debts. When the $50,000 interest payment is due, they have to borrow another $50,000 from someone else to pay me back, and so on. As long as they don't have enough money to pay their debts, they'll keep borrowing from others. When people realize that even though the US has the ability to pay, in reality, they're like people living off credit cards, spending all their money each month without the ability to pay. When it's time to pay, they don't have the money, so they have to swipe another credit card to pay off the previous one, buying time. But the interest on the original debt, which they couldn't pay anyway, plus compounding interest, makes the debt grow larger and larger. Therefore, people aren't stupid and are starting to no longer want to lend to the US.
For this reason, over the past few years, the Federal Reserve, Fed, has raised interest rates, hoping to attract people worldwide to lend money to the US or buy US government bonds. But the problem is that even with rising interest rates, long-term US bonds still aren't selling. Why is that? It's simple. Even if you know I can't pay my debts, if you agree to lend me $100 million for 10 years, I promise to pay you $5 million in interest each year instead of just $2 million as before. Sounds attractive, right? But in reality, the $100 million you lend isn't used for profitable investments. It's just taken out $5 million at a time to pay you interest. So, after 10 years, can I repay the original $100 million? You don't need to care, as long as you receive $5 million in annual interest during those 10 years. But would you dare to lend? According to textbook theory, when the US raises interest rates, government bond yields also rise. When the US lowers interest rates, bond yields fall. However, currently, whether the US raises or lowers interest rates, bond yields still rise. Why is that? Think about it. If many people are competing to lend you money, you only need to pay 2% interest. But now you have to pay 5% interest. That proves no one wants to lend to you. Currently, the US borrows money for 10 to 20-year terms and only receives about $50 billion. For 2 to 3-year terms, they only borrow $400 billion. But for short-term loans of 3 to 6 months, they borrow as much as $1.5 trillion at very high interest rates. What does this show? People don't believe the US can repay the principal in 10 years. But if they borrow short-term for 3 to 6 months and promise high interest rates, people are willing to lend. Even Warren Buffett, who is very patriotic, only buys short-term US bonds, not long-term ones. Therefore, to continue borrowing money to service its debt, the US is forced to continuously borrow short-term debt at high interest rates to pay interest on old debts. But Trump announced that when he takes office, these short-term debts will mature, and there won't be many new lenders willing to step up. Ultimately, fewer and fewer people will be willing to lend. So, Trump wants to continue lowering interest rates. But what will be the final result? The US will have to print its own money to pay debt. When they start turning on the money printing presses, the dollar will inflate and lose value. That will lead to a vicious cycle. The fewer lenders there are, the more money the US has to print, and the more the dollar will lose value. When the dollar loses value, US assets are also like being sold off at bargain prices. That's why Trump plans to address this issue. When no one wants to lend anymore, or when people gradually stop wanting to use the dollar, there's a first extreme option: to abolish the Federal Reserve and switch to using Bitcoin instead of the dollar. Is this even possible? Theoretically, even though the Fed is the US central bank, it's not a national bank. It's a private bank. That means Trump doesn't have the power to fire the Fed chairman, just as you can't fire the CEO of a company you don't own. All you can do is drive that company into bankruptcy, but you can't fire the CEO. You'd be surprised to learn that the US owes the most not to Japan or China, but to the Fed. In other words, the Fed is responsible for issuing dollars. When the US is short on money, the Fed prints money and lends it to the US. But this money must be repaid, and most of the tax money the US collects from its citizens goes back into the Fed's pockets.
That shows that the Fed is truly the owner of America. The hard-earned money you make ultimately turns into interest and is paid back to the Fed. As for the Fed, they just need to turn on the money printing press to collect all that interest.
So who controls the Fed? There are rumors that a very secretive family owns over $50 trillion in assets, while the current U.S. debt is only about $36 trillion. Recently, U.S. newspapers reported that the heir to this family died in a fire at their private mansion. What does this mean? If you have an opinion, please leave a comment. However, history shows that those who wanted to abolish the Fed did not come to a good end. For example, President Lincoln intended to issue greenbacks, and Kennedy wanted to peg the dollar's value to silver. Both met tragic ends. You can learn more through historical news reports. I genuinely don't understand why many people believe that if the government borrows money from you, they'll definitely pay it back. For example, U.S. government bonds are considered the safest assets in the world. But history shows that governments not paying debts or defaulting is entirely possible. They might pay interest, but the principal you lent might never be repaid. The current situation in the U.S. is precisely this. Of course, this situation can drag on, so many people don't really care. But when you hold cash, the moment the U.S. lowers interest rates or prints more money, the value of the money you worked so hard to earn will instantly decrease. In other words, there is no completely safe investment in the world. In fact, not investing is even more dangerous. Even if you want to avoid learning about investing, you'll eventually have to face it. As I said, Elon Musk has proposed abolishing the Fed. This means he doesn't want to prolong this. However, I think this is only a last resort because Trump has upgraded his new strategy to make the whole world lend money to the U.S. and help the U.S. repay its debt. What does that mean? The U.S.'s debt strategy 1.0 was this. During a time when the whole world was at war, the U.S. didn't participate in the fighting but sold weapons to make money. When the war ended, the U.S. picked up cheap opportunities to get rich. After the war, the whole world was poor, but the U.S. was very rich. At this point, the U.S. told the world, "You lack money and resources. Borrow our dollars to build your homes, factories, and rebuild your nations. We'll also sell you our products, but you have to pay interest." Thanks to this, the U.S. quickly became the world's creditor. Everyone's income worldwide had to dedicate a portion to paying interest to the U.S. It's like buying a house. The house is yours to live in, but your salary has to pay interest to the bank. Debt Strategy 1.0 was about lending to the entire world at high interest rates to turn the whole world into its employees. But this strategy later became ineffective because homes and factories worldwide had been sufficiently built, economies gradually recovered, goods were produced and sold, and profits increased significantly. Therefore, no one needed to borrow money from the U.S. anymore. Americans, meanwhile, had grown accustomed to being creditors, accustomed to being supported by the whole world. They no longer worked much, just took the money earned from all over the world to spend and shop. Thus, the U.S.'s lending business began to decline. Profits decreased while spending increased. The whole world continuously produced and earned a lot of dollars, leading to the need to upgrade Debt Strategy 1.0 to version 2.0. Strategy 2.0 is subtle borrowing. Specifically, you earn a lot of money, right? The U.S. will expand its balance sheet, print more money, increasing the risk of the dollar losing value. If you don't want the dollar to lose value, you'll have to lend your money to the U.S., and in return, you'll receive interest.
Initially, this borrowed money was used for business and investment to generate profits. But ultimately, it was divided among domestic financial corporations, and now they can't even pay the interest. Therefore, they had to upgrade the strategy to version 3.0, which is stealing money. Why did the whole world earn so many dollars from the US? Because countries sold goods to the US and the US paid them. Now, after you sell goods and earn US money, you have to give back 30% of it to the US. For example, you earn $1 million from the US, you have to give back $300,000. Thus, the amount of money the US spends doesn't decrease, but the amount of money it collects increases. If you don't agree, then don't even think about making money from Americans anymore. The US won't do business with you and will even punish you, right? That will cause you even more damage. This is tariffs. Militarily, the US won't protect you and might even create difficulties. Trump and his financial managers have intended to divide the world's nations into 3 groups. Group 1, Green Bucket. Countries that want to cooperate closely with the US, willing to do business with the US. Group 2, Yellow Bucket. Neutral countries. They want to cooperate and earn money from the US, but also buy US goods. Group 3, Red Bucket. Countries that want to confront the US. They only want to make money from the US and steal US technology. Which group you belong to will determine how the US treats you, from preferential treatment to sanctions. You can even choose yourself. If you want to be in the green bucket and be treated better by the US, you must sign certain agreements. For example, Japan signed the Plaza Accord with the US. They agreed not to increase many tariffs, but in return, Japan had to sell dollars to buy yen. This caused the Japanese yen to appreciate against the dollar and the dollar to depreciate. In just 3 years, the Japanese yen appreciated by 50% against the dollar. This meant that Japanese goods became half as expensive, while US goods became half as cheap. Japanese people no longer wanted to buy domestic goods. Instead, they bought imported goods from the US. At the same time, capital from Japan began flowing into the US to invest, buy US stocks and assets. US investors and businessmen also withdrew capital from Japan and brought money back home. This was nothing short of the US instantly draining money from Japan. At that point, doing business in Japan became very difficult. People didn't consume in Japan, didn't come for tourism, didn't invest, and even moved abroad. In recent years, those in Hong Kong have probably felt a similar situation.
Wasn't Japan very rich before? They once bought Rockefeller Center in the US, bought Columbia Pictures, Universal Studios. House prices in Tokyo at that time were even higher than house prices in the entire US. But when assets were pushed to bubble levels, when your money was drained, real estate and stock speculators could no longer find anyone to continue bearing the debt. Your houses and stocks would be sold off en masse. The result was countless people losing jobs, going bankrupt, and the real estate bubble immediately bursting. The suicide rate in Japan at that time rose to lead the world. When you do business and your products don't sell and your invested money is stuck, countless Japanese businesses suffered broken capital chains. In this situation, you were forced to carry your business, while US capitalists could come in and buy it back at a cheap price. You'll realize all of this isn't a conspiracy, but an operating model. If you're categorized into the red bucket, meaning you confront the US, then the US will raise import tariffs on you. At this point, what you can do is to devalue your currency. Suppose the US raises import tariffs by 10%, then your currency must also devalue by 10%.
Otherwise, your goods will become expensive and no one will buy them anymore.
For example, currently, if Vietnam is categorized into the red bucket, products like Vietnamese lighters are taxed. At that point, the price of Vietnamese lighters and US lighters will be almost equal. Those who used to buy Vietnamese lighters might switch to buying US lighters. Therefore, you are forced to devalue the Vietnamese currency. Only then can the price of lighters produced in Vietnam be cheaper than US goods. But if your currency devalues, everything you buy from the US will be much more expensive. For example, if you want to develop AI, you have to buy high-end graphics cards like NVIDIA from the US. But because the Vietnamese currency has devalued, buying graphics cards from the US will become more expensive. This means US import tariffs make the US earn more money. Your currency devaluation makes the US buy your goods cheaper, but you buy US goods more expensively. Although transactions still occur, the money you earn has to be shared with the US. At the same time, you have to pay a higher price to buy US goods.
Imagine if I opened a high-tech company in Vietnam, for example, a chip manufacturing plant, like those seaside shops. But because I locate my factory in Vietnam, I will be sanctioned by the US. If I don't want to be sanctioned, I'll have to move my company to the US. Once I move to the US, I become an insider. Not only do I not have to pay import tariffs, but I can also receive subsidies. For this reason, Vietnam's high-tech companies and talent will be extracted, leading to increased unemployment rates and a declining economy. No matter which path you choose, your money will be transferred to the US. It's just a matter of how fast or slow. Do you get the main point? If you are a country classified in the green bucket, your currency is likely to appreciate. Conversely, if you are classified in the red bucket, your currency will be at risk of devaluation. The countries previously categorized in the green bucket, meaning those that signed the Plaza Accord, include Japan, France, the UK, Germany, US allies, as well as Sweden, Switzerland, Canada, etc. If this bucket classification is actually implemented, the currencies of countries in the green bucket will appreciate against the dollar. Therefore, if we convert to these currencies beforehand, for example to Japanese yen, we can use the Japanese yen as a safe asset when the dollar devalues due to interest rate cuts. As for me, I previously converted some Japanese yen because I frequently travel to Japan and will need to use the yen. When Trump returns to power and actually implements his Money Movement 3.0 method, or if the US truly cuts interest rates and Japan truly raises interest rates, then the Japanese yen is likely to appreciate sharply. At that point, I will look for good opportunities to invest more in the yen. Note that I call the yen a hedge asset. This means I hold it because I believe the dollar will devalue against the yen. I buy it not to make a profit, but to diversify risk because I hold a lot of dollars. Think about it. Which countries are likely to be classified into the red bucket? When the currencies of those countries devalue, will that be a good time for us to buy the dip, to buy cheap assets? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Due to time constraints, I will stop here. I share free information on how to become wealthy, an entrepreneur, an investor, and achieve financial freedom. If you don't want to miss out, please follow my channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with everyone. I sincerely wish everyone who liked this video to achieve financial freedom soon. If you found just 1 or 2 sentences in today's content that helped improve your life, I am already satisfied.